Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to call this April 22nd meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Mr. DiMartini, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, we will start with Committee Member Santa Maria,
Here.
Mayor Rouse,
Here.
Committee Chair Harmon.
I'm here virtually.
Somewhere.
Thank you. I'm somewhere. Yeah, I'm here, but not here. With that, are there any general public comments to be made today?
Chair Harmon, none in the room and no hands are raised online.
Okay. Well, then we will move to our item, Mr. DiMartini, the General Fund Multi-Year Forecast Independent Review.
Thank you so much, Chair Harmon. Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Keith DiMartini, and I am the Finance Director for the city. It is my pleasure to kick off this item. I'll very quickly turn it over to our independent advisors that we brought on recently. We will be talking about an independent review that was conducted on the city's multi-year general fund forecasting processes and outcomes. This is very timely as we are introducing the budget proposal for fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027 later today at the full city council meeting. And I'll just introduce this topic and turn it over to them in just a moment. But first, I just want to say that there are multiple reasons for doing this, and multiple reasons for doing this now. It's really important that we constantly review and assess our practices and our policies around our multi-year forecasting to make sure that we're implementing best practices, to make sure that our assumptions are validated by industry standards, to make sure that we are considering all of our policies and procedures surrounding our budgeting and financial management practices and findings. And so we brought on NHA Advisors, or an independent advisory firm that conduct analyses and review processes such as this all across the country. And they have completed their review, and they're here today to present their findings and sort of their own independent judgment on our forecasting processes. We will be expanding our work with NHA Advisors in the coming months to focus some work on the enterprise funds in particular, and to also explore some potential additional revenue generating and financing options that the city could leverage going forward. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Christian Sprunger, and he was the lead on this effort with the city, and he was supported by Mr. Matt DeFilippis, who's here as well. So with that, Christian, please take it away.
Thank you, Keith. Hope you all can hear me okay. Excellent. Thanks for confirming. As Keith mentioned, my name is Christian Sprunger. I'm a vice president with NHA Advisors. We are municipal financial advisors. My colleague, Matt DeFilippis, is also on the line. He was integral in the modeling and the work for this general fund forecast. With respect to the presentation, if we could go to the background slide, please. Excellent. To provide an overview of the project, as Keith mentioned, the city engaged NHA to review the existing general fund forecasting practices and really just to develop an independent 5-year forecasting model. Importantly, our analysis is focused on the general fund, so we're excluding other funds such as Measure C or the Internal Service Fund. And today we'll be talking to you a little bit about a baseline scenario that we modeled. However, as you can imagine, there is a wide variety of scenarios that someone could run in a dynamic model. But this baseline scenario uses fiscal 25 mid-year budget as the base year and then projects 5 years from that. So through fiscal 30, using a dynamic revenue and expense growth assumption. Our goal with this exercise is really to evaluate long-term budget impact from revenues and expenses growing under a specific assumed rates. So as you can imagine, I mentioned there's a wide variety of scenarios we could evaluate. Nevertheless, we believe that what we're going to show you for the baseline is a reasonable projection based on a combination of historical actuals and future expectations. Next slide, please. Before discussing that baseline scenario, we wanted to give a high-level overview of our modeling process. So generally, our goal is to prepare a model that's informative, accessible, interactive, and transparent. Our goal for the model is to maximize its utility while providing actionable insights based on real data inputs. We prioritize a simplified, accessible output, either in the format of graphs or tables. We also built the city's model with an eye toward keeping the key drivers dynamic. The goal, of course, being to allow a user to play with assumptions on key revenue or expense line items to see what happens under each of those different scenarios. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the baseline annual growth assumption for the top 6 revenue categories. In the far right column with the orange heading, that shows what percent each of these 6 categories make up of the general fund's total revenues. So if we add those up, you can see at the bottom in orange there, it's approximately 86% of total revenues. So these 6 are definitely the lion's share. The far left blue column, the column with the blue heading, shows the baseline scenario's projected annual growth rate for each of these revenue line items. And that middle gray column really shows the historical 3-year context for a historical 3-year compound annual growth rate. Typically, we do try to look back 5 years, but right now we're in this weird spot where you look back 2 more years, you're in 2020 and 2021, and then the historical data is skewed because of COVID pandemic swings. So we're focusing in on the 3 years from 2022, 23, and 24 actuals. Our sales and use tax projections for both general and Measure I is 2% annually. So this number is slightly above the historic growth rate, but that's based on a couple of things. The city contracts with a third party, Avenue Insights, for sales tax projection data. Avenue's forecast for this line item ranges from just under 1% for fiscal 26 all the way up to 2.3% for fiscal 28, and a variety of points in between those two bookends. Our 2% assumption is based on finding a happy medium between those bookends, and also based on, generally speaking, we see that these third parties who provide sales tax projections are becoming a little more conservative. And so our 2% is to find that happy medium between being conservative but not being too conservative. Relative to the historical growth rate, our model is conservative with respect to future property tax growth. So if you look in that far right column, you can see it's almost 29% of total revenues. So it's a big line item. It's a major driver. Our 4.5% assumption is based on the 2% allowed under Proposition 13, plus growth in property taxes from home sales, release of pent-up assessed value, and new construction in the area. The 7.4% 3-year historical average benefited from a high number of transfers, significantly or specifically in 2022, but we recognize that real property transfer tax, which is kind of a leading indicator of this property tax revenue, that's decreased significantly from those 2022 highs for fiscals 23 and 24. As a result of fewer home sales, there's less pent-up assessed value that's released, and so that pushes down that annual property tax growth. Nevertheless, we do recognize there is incredible housing demand in the Santa Barbara area, and not a lot of inventory to meet that demand. So additionally, given where median home sales prices are in the area, a relatively small percentage of turnover in the housing stock can drive higher overall property tax increases. And so that's why we settled on that 4.5% annual growth assumption for our baseline forecast. With respect to TOT, transient occupancy tax, historically, the 3-year look back, it stayed pretty flat. You know, if we incorporated fiscal 20 and 21 with the COVID swings, you'd see some wild swings happening there. But we focus in on the 3 years more recent, and it stayed pretty flat. Our 1.5% annual growth is based on the assumption that that there are several unlicensed, by several I mean several hundred unlicensed short-term rental properties operating around and in the city, and our assumption is that the city is able to start collecting from those unlicensed operators. Additionally, we assume that the 60-plus hotels within the city continue to fill beds and see demand. We're projecting both service charges and interfund charges and reimbursements to grow amounts significantly below historical revenue growth rates. With respect to service charges, the biggest line item in this category is building permits. That line item has grown at an average of about 5% per year. So that's what's driving that 3.9% annual growth in the historical. We recognize, though, that building permit revenue could be negatively impacted by high interest rates, inflation, including tariff-related inflation, and so we dialed down that future revenue growth to 2% per year. On the interfund charges and reimbursements, the biggest line item in there is the transfers related to engineering work orders. So these are interfund transfers between city funds. That line item specifically has grown at about 20% per year for the 3-year historical window. And so that's the primary driver behind that 13.1% you see overall. But our projection dials that revenue growth back. It says, hey, the growth in that is going to normalize. It's going to be 2% per year for the 5-year projection. We could go to the next slide, please. So similar to the last slide, this slide focuses on the top expenditures, and the last slide had 6 line items. This one has 5. So these 5, as you can see in the far right column, the orange header and the orange at the bottom, is about 97% of total expenditures. By far, salaries is the largest line item, almost 49% of total. On the 3-year historical look back, that's grown at 6.3% per year. Our projection assumes 6.7% for fiscal 26, 5.7% for fiscal 27, and then 4.7% annual growth for fiscals 28 through 30. We recognize that the city is going through a classification and compensation study, and the results of that study may drive additional increases or changes in this line item in the next couple of years. But since this expenditure accounts for almost half of each year's general fund budget, long-term control of overall general fund expenses really comes down to this line item, first and foremost. One important nuance behind projecting salary expenses is projecting future staffing vacancies. So our baseline scenario assumes the city's vacancies hover between 2 and 3% per year for the next 5 years. To the extent that actual staffing vacancies are higher, of course, then you would have some savings related to that, so those actual expenses will be lower. On the CalPERS side of things, the second row, our projections are based on what's provided from the Pension Outlook tool online that's provided by CalPERS. It reflects the most recently available data, which is a 9.5% investment return for fiscal 24. And then it assumes that CalPERS meets the target 6.8 for fiscal 25, the current fiscal year. As I mentioned, that's the most recently published from CalPERS, but you're probably seeing the stock market just like we are and seeing what's happening and the trends in the last few weeks. And so it's likely, I would say, that CalPERS investment returns are below their target, potentially even negative. If that were to occur, if it was below the 6.8% target, or if it was negative, there would be additional growth in this line item starting in fiscal 28. Our 5% assumption shown here with the star next to it, the asterisk, is just it's an average. The higher growth is in the next couple years, and then the lower growth is in the later years. All other benefits, the third row, is comprised of a variety of things, but approximately 2/3 of this is group insurance and health insurance. We recognize the city has limited ability to control these insurance costs, and the 8.1% historical is pretty close to what we're seeing with other public agencies' historical growth in this category. Our 5-year projection assumes that cost growth reduces to a more sustainable 5% annually. Of course, we recognize there's limited control there, so take that with a grain of salt. Allocated costs include a variety of expenditures such as vehicle replacement, building maintenance, liability insurance, property insurance. Historically, these have grown significantly, as you can see in that 18.9%. Our assumption is that going forward, these expenses still grow at double digit, but just at that 10%, assuming that while they've spooled up significantly, they sort of flatten out a little bit, although they're still growing at 10%. Supplies and services, finally, the last row is made up of a variety of expenditures. The biggest is water purchase costs and contract professional services. Our projection assumes that this line item grows at 2.5% annually, a long-term CPI target. We recognize it's higher than the 3-year historical average, which is basically flat, but it is in line. The 2.5 is more in line with a target growth rate, a CPI-based target growth rate for this category. Next slide, please. So based on the assumptions on the prior two slides, plugging those into the model, it puts the output for revenues and expenditures looks something like this. The revenue growth is shown in the light blue line, and the expense growth there is in the orange line. So following a fiscal 26 balanced budget, our projection is that there would start to be a divergence with expenses growing faster than revenues. As you can see, that orange line outpaces the light blue. On the long end of the curve by fiscal 30, that gap is about $21 million. Next slide, please. So this is a companion to the prior slide. This just shows the fund balances based on that spread between revenues and expenditures. And so the green bars there, that's the fund balance. The yellow line, that is the city's combined 25% reserve policy, made up of a 10% contingency reserve and 15% disaster reserve. As you can see in the baseline forecast, we're projecting that the fund it increases slightly in fiscal 26, but then it's spent down consistently and significantly through fiscal 29, and then in fiscal 30, it would flip negative. A common question we get is related to appropriate reserve levels, and the short answer is there's really no one-size-fits-all blanket answer, given the dynamic nature of each agency's and city's revenue sources. Government Finance Officers of America, or Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA of America, recommends at least 2 months, or about 16 to 17% general fund reserve as a starting point, with adjustments up or down based on revenue volatility. Rating agencies like S&P Global Ratings view reserves as a percentage of revenues, with 15% and higher getting the top score in the reserves category, though they do reserve the right to make adjustments based on each city's situation. To provide a little bit of a sense for what we're seeing in neighboring cities, Oxnard and Ventura to the south of the city each target about a 16 to 17% general fund reserve. Oxnard's general fund credit rating is 2 notches below the city of Santa Barbara's. Ventura has the same AA credit rating. Further to the south, Camarillo has a AA plus general fund credit rating. They target a 50% general fund reserve, so a big jump there. And then to the north, Lompoc, they do not have a current general fund rating, but they target a 25% general fund reserve. So we see a wide variety, and the rating agencies, from a rating perspective, when you're past that threshold, that 15%, higher is better, of course, but it's not necessarily going to translate into a 1-for-1 rating adjustment. Next slide, please. So this section is going to touch on some alternative scenarios for revenues and expenses. Let's go to the next slide, please. On the revenue side, we recognize that the city is currently in the process of some litigation related to some UT revenues for digital streaming services. Should that be successful, additional revenues, great. The amount, though, would need to be significantly higher to materially change the outcome of the baseline model. On the sales tax growth, if it grows at 3% instead of the 2% we've assumed, the additional revenue would certainly help to offset those negatives in the 2030, but the ending result would still stay materially the same. Where we start to see a shift, though, and a material change in the outcome is if property tax, right? I mentioned that it's about 29% of total revenues. So if that grows at 7.4% a year, which is the 3-year historical average, instead of 4.5% that we've assumed, then you start to see a positive ending fund balance all the way out through 2030. The fund balances would decrease, but the ending balance would still be positive. On the next slide, which is the expense assumptions, a couple of drivers of transfers out. Our model assumes that there's about $4 million of annual transfers out, and that those still happen for the 5-year term. To the extent that those are less or more, it would impact the outcome. But as I mentioned, the key driver on the expense side is salaries, making up about 49% of total expenditures. So if the salary expense is growing at, say, 4.5% versus the aggregate average of 5.27% in our model. I mentioned our model has a higher growth, 6.7 for the first year, and then it steps down to 4.7 in the out years. The aggregate average of the 5 years is about 5.27. So 4.5 growth versus a 5.27 would result in a positive ending balance by fiscal 30 as well. Next slide, please. So we're into the final section, and then we can talk through questions and alternatives. But the next slide talks about some caveats before we get to the conclusions. So a few things I just want to make sure is clear. We're working from the fiscal 25 mid-year budget, and we worked with city staff to identify and isolate one-time revenues and one-time expenditures, because including those in a forecast can really skew the results, especially when you're working with a base year as the starting point. Our modeling assumes business as usual during the term of the forecast, regardless of any 1 year's outcome. And we recognize that that's a pretty simplistic approach. That the reality is that cities and any organization adjusts year over year based on results. And so we recognize that there is room for a material change from what our model's projecting to reality based on adjustments that might happen during that 5-year period. We're focusing in on operating results. So our modeling minimizes capital expenditures, general fund transfers out. I mentioned that it has about 4 million total transfers out. We also assume about 1.3 million annual general fund CIP. Of course, the majority of the CIP being done through Measure C. The reason behind that is just to focus in on operating revenues, operating expenditures. Due to differences between budget and audit categories, the model is really not intended to serve as a backward-looking tool to tie out to old audits. It's really a forward-looking tool since it's in the categorizations of the budget. And I just caveat that in case someone was wanting to try to tie out to historical audits. Last slide, please. Okay, 3 main conclusions. First, based on our independent review and our findings, we think the city's current forecasting practices being done by your finance department are sound. And the outcome that's projected by the city's finance department and by our model both indicate future budgetary stress and deficits if changes are not made or if expenses are not controlled. We do recognize, to put things in a more positive light, that the city's made great efforts to put yourselves in a good position for the future, namely Measure I, the passage of that and the revenue that brings in. That's huge for future balancing of budgets. We do recognize salary and benefits. Those 2 categories combined are almost 60% of the budget. So those 2 categories really drive the outcomes. As I mentioned, it assumes business as usual for the term of the projection. We recognize, though, that adjustments would be made from year to year. We just aren't in a place to make those adjustments on your behalf or to project what those adjustments might be. Finally, there's always unanticipated events that happen in any forecast. No one foresaw COVID-19, and who knows what tariff impacts are, or what the next thing coming in the news cycle would do to the future. So with that, happy to take questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Mayor Rouse, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned in the presentation that the Measure C was taken completely out of the calculus. Is that correct?
That's correct, on the revenue side and on the expenditure side.
Right. I'm just kind of curious. So does that mean in all the salaries and benefits, the capital projects which had labor included from Measure C payment were also taken out, the salary and benefit portion of that?
We recognize that there is that transfer in, that internal transfer on the revenue side of things. It's in the category for interfund charges and reimbursements. There's some engineering work orders revenues being included there.
Yeah, I don't know how you completely eliminate that crossover, but yeah. Okay.
All right, any other questions? Councilmember Santamaria?
No questions. Thank you, Chair Harmon.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And no questions from me either at this time. Are there any public comments on this item?
Chair Harmon, none in the room and no hands online.
Thank you. And I should have asked Mr. DiMartini, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make on this?
Chair Harmon, thank you for the opportunity. I don't really, other than to say I really appreciate and value the work that NHA advisors have done to sort of validate the hard work that has been done over the multiple years with sort of addressing a variety of different financial and budgetary challenges that we face as an organization. And so it's really, it's helpful to understand and acknowledge the independent review so that we can continue to improve our processes and our procedures and the communication that we have with City Council, this Finance Committee, and then future public meetings that we have going forward. And so I just want to thank and appreciate the work of our independent advisors.
Agreed. Are there any comments from my colleagues on this item?
Chair Harmon, I'll make a brief comment. I wanted to echo what Mr. DiMartini said and just thank you to NHA advisors for your comprehensive review of this. I think it really points to a bright future for our city and especially for the work that our finance department is doing. And so I know there's a lot of instability potentially in the future, but I'm confident that, you know, with our staff and having these third parties review our processes, I think we're on the right path. So just really want to, you know, thank everybody that has been doing this incredible work.
Yeah, I'll have
Thank
a
you.
com-
Mayor Ross, any words
Yeah,
to add?
yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a cautionary tale, as most of these kind of projections tend to be, about, expenditures in the future and extraordinary expenditures in our current budget. So, yeah, it's still humbling, having worked in past Measure I the way we did, to still have these things facing us. So we're gonna have to go with, very delicate steps going forward.
Agreed, and I will associate myself with the comments of both of you, and also echo my appreciation for the work. It's so important from a government transparency perspective that we continue to undertake these efforts to confirm our assumptions, to validate, particularly when it comes to the public trust around taxpayer dollars, that we are being responsible, thoughtful, and really thinking about stewardship and our responsibility to steward these funds safely and effectively through the future. And this is yet another example of sort of proof positive that our finance department really takes that responsibility seriously and lives up to the challenge in a very real way. So of course, thank you very much to NHA, but particular thanks to our finance department, Mr. DiMartini, and your team for how careful and thoughtful you are in putting together these assumptions and really guiding us through, as both Mayor Ross and Councilmember Santa Maria have said, is surely going to be a complex time at the very least. So with that, I believe that's our final item for today. Is that correct, Mr. DiMartini?
Yes, that is correct, and there's no action item on this item.
Okay, so having received that report, I will adjourn this meeting until next time with thanks.
Thank you so much.